Hi, so this is a conversation that started with a question that I've been thinking about for a while, which is what would it mean to build a life where I'm not defined by a fixed identity or a predetermined path? I realized that what I really want isn't freedom from constraints altogether. I'm actually quite comfortable with constraints when I choose them. What I do not want is to have my path decided in advance by society, by other people, or even by an identity I've created for myself in the past. I talked about how I've always seen myself as a problem solver, but over time I've become more interested in problems that are not technical. Questions questions about how we relate to ourselves and to each other. That led into a broader exploration of expression, creativity, contribution, and the desire to help people feel less alone or suffer less unnecessarily. And eventually something deeper emerged. Perhaps the thing I've been moving toward all along is creating a community where people feel genuinely seen and heard, where they can contribute on their own terms, and where commitment and coherence emerge naturally over time rather than being imposed in advance. This conversation is essentially me trying to figure out what I actually think about all of that. Okay, so I'm doing this thing where you know, in I'm trying to perfect this large language model prompt to sort of interview me, and what I'm trying to do is to feed it into a completely uh, untrained sort of a, a, a version of ChatGPT that doesn't have any memories of me. It doesn't know me at all, and I'm trying to get it to interview me the way that a thoughtful interviewer would interview you. And I'm trying to see. So the goal of this activity is to get me out of my shell, to get me to start talking about things that matter to me personally, and a lot of my interests center around how people build trust with each other. Probably because that's where I am at life as of now. I'm trying to um, self differentiate myself from my past environments. I'm also trying to sort of individuate something that I didn't get to do all that well earlier, or at least that I think I didn't get to do that earlier. But yeah, this is like an attempt to doing multiple different sorts of things, primarily to expose myself to people and um, to sort of communicate who I am as a person, and then to attract the right people, I suppose, the people who are on a similar wavelength as me, and to get talking with them, and to create something, to build something, to engineer something, and to practice art, and to sort of um, to indulge in craft. Yeah. What is something you've been thinking about lately that you keep returning to, even though you're not entirely sure what you think about it yet? Let me think. That's an interesting one. So, something I keep returning to, thinking about, is that ideally I'd like to do something that isn't bounded by, that isn't defined. Like, I want my craft, my work, to be something that is very fluid, that doesn't have a fixed form or shape, that allows me to do things on a whim, basically. I don't want to be, I want to be unbridled. I don't want to be constrained by the expectations of what my job requires me to do. And I've been building my life, I've been building my philosophy, my ideals, and have been applying my values to this problem. Like, how do I get to optimize for all the things that I value, and for also this thing that I want, that kind of freedom in my life? When you say unbridled, I'm curious about the exact thing you're trying to protect. Is it freedom from external expectations? Someone else deciding what you should make, when you should make, and what counts as useful? Or is it something deeper? Freedom from having to become a particular kind of person at all? Because those sound similar, but they lead somewhere quite different. Oh no, I definitely think it's the deeper version, where I want to have the freedom from having to become a particular kind of person, so that I don't trap myself into an identity that is defined by the external expectations that others have of me. Conventional wisdom would sort of punish me, reprimand me by saying, no, that's not how it works. You have to pick a lane. But I don't, but maybe that I could be something new. Maybe I don't need to be anything, I don't need to fit myself into a niche category before I've actually done the work that I genuinely want to do. And that's something else that I've been working on, to sort of not commit to one particular path, but to let that commitment show up as the trajectory of my natural path that I make my footsteps in. There's an interesting distinction in what you're saying. You're not rejecting commitment, you're rejecting commitment to an identity in advance. You seem to be saying, let me make the next genuine move and let the shape of my life emerge from the accumulation of those moves. I'm curious about the other side of that, though. Suppose you really did give yourself complete permission not to become anything in particular, no niche, no professional identity, no coherent label you have to defend. What would you actually want to spend your days doing? Not what would be strategically useful, not what could become a career, not what would make sense as a recognizable craft, just what kinds of things pull you to them when nobody is asking you to be somebody. I think I like talking about things. I think I like conversing with people, having debates. I also like sort of, or maybe I don't like debates that much, but I do like ideas. Ideas that sort of free you from your fixed set of beliefs. And I would like to contribute something in that space where I could, talk about certain things, reach certain people, and be able to somehow offer words that sort of relieve them of unnecessary suffering. So I guess I'd say it's wisdom in that sense. But Chris Williamson already has a podcast for that. But I don't know. Maybe I would like to be somebody who can express my own inner experience, whatever that might be. It could be wisdom, it could be appreciation of something that I find to be beautiful. It could be, it could just be an expression, like an artistic expression. Could be acting, could be singing. Basically an expression of how I'm feeling on the inside, because that really sort of aligns my external and internal worlds. Like I get to have contact between those two worlds, and that I think could be deeply fulfilling. So the host says, I notice that when you describe what you want to do, you keep arriving at expression, but not expression as I have something to say, therefore I need an audience. It sounds more like there is something happening inside me and I want to give it a form so that it can exist outside of me. Sometimes that form might be an idea, sometimes a conversation, sometimes beauty, sometimes acting or singing. And then there's the other thing you mentioned, relieving unnecessary suffering. That introduces a relationship to other people. You don't just want to express yourself, you seem interested in what happens between your inner world and someone else's inner world. So I'm wondering about something slightly more fundamental. If you imagine expressing something that feels completely true to you, an idea, a feeling, an idea of feeling, a piece of music, a performance, and nobody ever saw it, heard it, or benefited from it, would the act of expression itself still feel worthwhile? Or does part of the fulfillment come specifically from that inner experience being shared and meeting another person? Wow, this is a tough one, to be honest. Ideally, there would be a great deal of satisfaction extracted from not extracted, but felt during the very act of creating something, of expressing something that I genuinely want to express. Whether that reaches the intended party or not, I mean, obviously you'll feel bad if it doesn't. And, there's one person out there who needs to hear that message. I think I'll definitely feel slightly disappointed, but nonetheless, I think by putting my work out there on YouTube, let's say, I am making it easier for someone else who needs to hear that message, and and if the internet sort of helps them sort of navigate their way through to the message that I have to broadcast, then there would definitely be satisfaction delivered from that as well. But to the broader question, would the act of expression itself still feel worthwhile? Yes, I think it would. I think it would. I'm not entirely sure of it as if now, but yeah, I think it would. I think there's something important in the uncertainty at the end. You seem to have discovered that expression has at least two kinds of value for you. One is intrinsic, the feeling of taking something that exists privately and giving it form. The other is relational, the possibility that the thing you make travels through the world and reaches someone who needed it. But I'm curious about the tension between those two. If expression is intrinsically worthwhile, then you don't need the audience to validate the act. But the moment you imagine YouTube, the person who needs to hear it, the message finding its way to them, there is suddenly a desire for impact. And impact brings measurement, feedback, expectations, perhaps even an identity. So here's the question I'd like to stay with. What would happen to your idea of unbridled freedom if you became very good at this and people started expecting something from you? Imagine that you find an audience, they love the way you think, they come back because they want your perspective. Eventually, people start saying, this is what you do, this is who you are. Would that feel like the fulfillment of the freedom you're describing, or would you start feeling the walls of the identity closing in around you? I mean, I do see myself in part as a problem solver. I mean, that's something that I've sort of dedicated my life to building around in education, in my education. And, you know, I've always seen myself as a problem solver, and I've, you know, through my journey during uni and during my postgrad as well, I was just trying to find more and more interesting problems to solve. It was like a search for like the ultimate problem that I can solve, which I realized was not technical. It wasn't a technical problem to be solved. It was like an internal psychological, sociological problem that needed to be solved, which was, you know, how I relate to myself as a person and how I relate to other people. And sorry, what was the question again? I'm just reading the question again. Yeah, so if they start saying that this is what you do, this is who you are, would that feel like the fulfillment of the freedom you're describing, or would you start feeling the walls of the identity closing in around you? I mean, I would definitely feel like it's a constraint, it's a new constraint that I would have to sort of self-organize myself around, but I wouldn't feel like my identity is fixed, because I think I would be able to choose what kind of problems I wish to engage with and what kind of problems I don't wish to engage with. And so I really want to build an identity around my own preferences in the moment, in the now, rather than on the basis of something that I do. Because that changes, that my interests will change. My interests are probably going to evolve much more in the next decade or so, in the next 2-3 decades, you know, for as long as I live. And I would like to respect those desires of mine to want to solve different kinds of problems, to, you know, everything that people do is basically problem solving in one sense or the other. Even the act of expressing something as intimate as, you know, singing, acting, dancing, all of these things are expressions of the emotions that you feel on the inside. And so, and they're problems to be solved, because, you know, you sort of drift towards what feels comfortable to you, what you feel comfortable expressing, and what sort of wants to move through you. And to sort of externalize that internal emotion is, in some senses, or maybe I'm reading too much into it, but yeah, that's one way of seeing it, I suppose. But the point is, I don't think I would feel boxed in, because I think I would like to sort of, you know, really focus on this preference-based identity rather than anything else, and that sort of would likely keep me sort of centered with the present moment, rather than, you know, drifting off to the kind of identity I've had in the past or the kind of identity I'd like to have in the future.
I think it would be more focused on the kind of identity I would like to have right now.
I think you've made a subtle move here that I want to linger on. At first, I don't want an identity sounded almost like freedom from identity, but now it sounds more like you're interested in a different kind of identity, one that is self-authored, provisional, and responsive to the present. And your idea of yourself as a problem solver seems to survive all of the changes in content. The problem can be technical, psychological, social, artistic, interpersonal. What stays constant isn't what you're solving, it's your relationship to the problems themselves. That makes me wonder whether the thing you're actually trying to protect isn't freedom from identity at all. Maybe you're trying to protect freedom of attention, the freedom to wake up and genuinely find this interesting today rather than having your previous choices tell you what you're supposed to be interested in. Wow, that is exactly it, to be honest. And there's a fascinating question hiding inside of that. Do you think there's a difference between following your present desires freely and simply being governed by whatever happens to interest you? Because you seem to place quite a lot of trust in the latter. I'll follow what wants to move through me. I'll solve the problems I'm drawn to it. I'll let the trajectory emerge. But what if your desires sometimes conflict with one another? What if something is deeply interesting for 3 months but requires 5 years of boring, disciplined work to become meaningful? What if the thing you most value eventually asks you to override your present preference rather than obey it? I'm curious whether your conception of freedom has room for that kind of self-imposed constraint, or whether for you, the willingness to abandon a path is itself more important than seeing it through.
I think, no, I definitely, I can operate with constraints, with self-imposed constraints for sure. What I do not want to operate with are impositions. I don't want to impose on my time. I'm more than happy in certain cases imposing on the form that I use to express solutions to problems, or acting, singing, dancing, emotions. But I don't want to choose a path. I don't want my path to be pre-decided. I want to take each step as if it's a fresh step. I don't want to be, to follow a certain trajectory that's already been decided by anyone, but including myself. I want to be free and sort of, like I said, unbridled by expectations of the kind of path anyone else might choose for me, and myself included.
That distinction feels much sharper now. You're not saying I refuse constraints, you're saying I want constraints to be chosen locally rather than inherited globally. You might spend 6 months obsessively learning something, accept all kinds of constraints in order to get good at it, and then later walk away, not because you can tolerate discipline, but because you don't want a decision you made 6 months ago to acquire authority over the person you are today. And there's something almost philosophical about that. You don't want your past self to become the sovereign of your present self. But then I wonder about the phrase each step as if it's a fresh step, because there are two very different ways that could work. One is radical openness. I don't know where this is going. I'll pay attention and respond to what I encounter. The other is radical refusal of continuity. I don't want anything I've chosen previously to obligate me, because that might constrain who I can become. The first seems like freedom. The second could potentially become another kind of prison where even your own commitments start feeling like external impositions. So I'm curious which one feels more like what you're actually reaching for. When you imagine yourself 10 or 20 years from now, would you want that future person to look back and say, I had no idea where I was going, but somehow all these things became alive? Or would even that idea of a coherent trajectory feel slightly suspect to you, as that coherence itself is something you don't want to optimize for?
No, coherence is definitely something I would want to optimize for, because I want to be, I want to contribute to the world, but just on my own terms. But coherence is something that I want. I want coherence to emerge out of the trajectory I choose locally, rather than me submitting to a kind of coherence that I commit myself to. Does that sort of make sense? I mean, I'm basically essentially saying that I want commitment to be what is seen like over time, like it's seen as a temporal emergence of my interests and my desires and my wants and my needs and what I want to do and the kind of things that I want to contribute to the world, rather than as a commitment to a certain pathway, a certain way of living life, where I'm bound to the conditions that I sort of bind myself to. That's a bit superfluous, but yeah.
Yes, that makes sense. And I think the phrase commitment as temporal emergence gets surprisingly close to what you're describing. You're not opposed to commitment, you're opposed to front loading commitment. You don't want to say, this is who I am, therefore these are the things I will do, therefore these are the things that I must continue doing. You'd rather discover through repeated choices that, oh, looking backward, this is what I've consistently cared about. So the commitment isn't something you announce beforehand, it's something that becomes visible afterward. That raises a question I find more interesting than whether this philosophy is right. If you look backward at your life so far, what do you think has already been committed to you without you consciously deciding to commit to it? Not your degrees, jobs, or externally legible achievements necessarily. I mean, what keeps recurring in you? A certain kind of problem, a certain kind of beauty, a certain kind of human interaction, a certain kind of question, a certain way of seeing the world. What has your life already been quietly committing you to before you gave it a name?
I think it's all been about being seen and heard by people close to me. So I think I eventually want to create a community personally in which people feel seen and people feel heard, and they get to choose how to contribute to the community on their own terms rather than being forced by external external circumstances. I want a community in which everyone's motivation is crowded out by intrinsic motivation rather than by extrinsic or internalized motivations of what the external world demands of them. Yeah. And so, I think that's like maybe a pipe dream, but I would certainly like to work towards it. My entire idea is to build a community in which I feel loved and accepted, and and that love carries on. I'm able to love others, others are able to love me, and so on and so forth. And that I'm able to do some good in this world for the kind of people that value what I have to give. It's a bit of a double knot over that, but I think it works out. What I hear at the end is that the thread was never really what should I do. It was closer to what kind of world would let people and me be fully alive without having to earn the right to exist as themselves. You started with wanting unbridled work, moving through expression and problem solving, then through self-authored commitment, and arrived at being seen and heard. And the community you imagine seems to extend your own philosophy outward. People can belong without first becoming a particular kind of person. That doesn't sound like a conclusion you've proven. It sounds more like something you've discovered you care about, and perhaps that's fitting. The commitment emerged rather than being chosen at the beginning. Yeah, that's it.